right, quick recap for part one. Truth matters. There is evidence for God, but instead we're going to get arguments. Yay! Now for part two.
It's called Necessary. We're going to build a case for the foundation of the universe.
Foundation of the universe? Wow. Really? The whole universe? That's amazing. That's incredible. I'm sure you're going to talk about solar systems and stars and the formation there, and gravity and black holes and cosmic background radiation and Hawking's radiation and redshift and no? Wait a minute. You're not going to? Well, surely though you're going to talk about different scientific peer-reviewed publications about the matter and bring forth the piles of evidence that all support your assertions and ideas done by reputable people that have worked on this issue for decades. No? Okay, well, maybe you will rely upon your own knowledge of science, as limited as that might be. And you're going to speak only in terms of possibilities, of beliefs, not asserting that this is the way it must be because you don't have any standing at all whatsoever to make extraordinary claims about the universe, since you have zero knowledge that would be necessary to actually say anything that would be scientifically accurate in regards to the universe, other than to just mention what other scientists have already said that you couldn't possibly hope to have anything to add to. Or maybe you're going to disregard science completely and instead go with the philosophical mumbo-jumbo that we've grown so accustomed to. Gee, I wonder which way you're going to go.
If the general picture, however, of a Big Bang followed by an expanding universe is correct, what happened before that? Was the universe devoid of all matter and then the matter suddenly somehow created? How did that happen? In many cultures, the customary answer is that a god or gods created the universe out of nothing. But if we wish to pursue this question courageously, we must, of course, ask the next question. Where did God come from? If we decide that this is an unanswerable question, why not save a step and conclude that the origin of the universe is an unanswerable question? Or, if we say that God always existed, why not save a step and conclude that the universe always existed, that there's no need for a creation, it was always here? These are not easy questions. Cosmology brings us face to face with the deepest mysteries, with questions that were once treated only in religion and myth.
Like, why is there something rather than nothing? What is responsible for dependent beings like you and me? I'm going to say my answer is a foundation. This is something that depends on nothing else for its existence. So, an important distinction here to bring up first is the difference between contingent facts and necessary facts. So something is contingent if it could have been otherwise. So for example, my existence is dependent on my parents. It's possible that my parents could have never met or something else along those lines. So my existence is contingent. I could have failed to exist. However, there are also necessary facts, which are things that couldn't have been otherwise. So you could look at things like the laws of logic, or for example, that 7 is a prime number. It's true in all possible worlds that these things exist. There's no way that they could have failed to exist. That's something that's necessary. And when we're looking at the foundation, I'm going to argue the foundation is necessary. Section 3. So here's an important argument that I'm going to bring for necessary foundation. So arguments from contingency, just to generalize, go from the existence of contingent things, so things that could have been otherwise, to the existence of something necessary. They can allow for things like an infinite past. Unlike typical Kalam arguments, we're going to argue that maybe an infinite past series of events is impossible. The argument that I'm first going to present here is totally cool with an infinite past. Also, I only focus on stage 1 here. Stage 1 tries to identify some sort of necessary thing or stuff, and stage 2 is going to point towards God. So you could be an atheist or agnostic or whoever and totally agree with everything I'm going to say here in section 1. We can both agree that there's a foundation. We can just disagree if it's conscience or material or something else along these lines. This idea is also compatible with there being some sort of like brute fact, something that exists without some sort of explanation. And the argument that I'm using today comes from Alex Proust. So long story short, what I'm trying to argue today is that there's something that just has always existed, some sort of like foundation from which everything else comes from. And that's kind of like the main idea of what I'm trying to do today.
I wish I had a link I could click on to find out who this guy is, but I don't, because he didn't put one in the video description or like in a pinned comment. So that's great. Thanks for that. I'm not going to look him up on my own. Moving on.
All right, so in section 4, let's just defend this argument. So this argument comes from Alexander Proust in the Blackwell Companion to Natural Theology. So first, every contingent fact has an explanation. There is a contingent fact that includes all other contingent facts. Therefore, there's an explanation of this fact. Then this explanation must involve a necessary being. And finally, this necessary being is God. So this is from Alexander Proust, again, in the Blackwell Companion to Natural Theology, where we're going from the existence of contingent facts to some sort of like necessary foundation.
All right. Let's have fun with this thing that looks like a syllogism but isn't one. Number 1, every contingent fact has an explanation. Okay, so we're going to assume that that's true. If it's true, then we now need a explanation for this. Otherwise, it's not true. Because in order to show it's true, we need to now explain the fact that every contingent fact has an explanation, and that would include itself, resulting in an infinite regress, or essentially a reductio ad absurdum of itself, unless what you're saying here is an attempt at a tautology, in which case a truth table would have been nice. But you don't know what a truth table is, do you, Zach? And if you do know what a truth table is, I'd love you to produce a truth table for number 1 here. I'd like to see how that works. Show me your work. Anyways, number 2 is that there's a contingent fact that has an explanation that includes all other contingent facts that also have an explanation. It's interesting how you leave out has an explanation out of 2, because I guess you want us to forget that every contingent fact has to have an explanation, but I didn't forget. See, I included that, unlike you, which then changes what 2 is from 1, because 2 now is different than 1. Because you're saying that there's a contingent fact, but you're not saying that contingent fact has an explanation. So now it's a different sort of contingent fact. It could be. I recognize it as slightly different because you didn't include the other part of that. That's a problem. So it's every A has B. Every A includes A. See, there's a problem there. The structure has started to degrade. It has started to fall apart. This is why, Zach, you need to learn informal logic. Then you go on to, therefore, there's an explanation of this fact. That would be the conclusion to an argument, which this isn't. And also this conclusion would not follow from 1 or 2. And then that would also make this affirming the consequent. You've already said that every contingent fact has an explanation, so to summarize that every fact has an explanation is just saying what you already said, so number 3 is not necessary, unless number 3 is referencing number 2, which then just is another non sequitur, because you're saying fact rather than contingent fact, which is another non sequitur, because you're not saying contingent fact that has an explanation. This thing is broken. Oh, but then, because you can't put the letter C in an argument for some reason, then you just have 4 that it has to be a necessary being. That came out of nowhere. That's extraordinarily non-sequitorian of you. And then 5, which is just completely made up at this point, just put anything in there. that necessary being is God. And then some reference, I don't know what that's about. You say page whatever, that's nice. Who is that? What is that? Is that a book? What is that? Do you have a link to it? No, of course not. Why would you? Why in the bleep did you include a citation? That's not how you do a citation. And then if you have a citation inside of an argument, that breaks it even further. Then this is an essay. It's not even a syllogism. It can't be valid or sound. Oh my word! This is nothing. This is what is this? Is it like a list? Is this a list to go to the store with? Like, I'm gonna pick up fruits on the deli aisle because that's where you belong in the vegetables, and the macaroni is in the hamburgers because that's where you find it. But you have to do the thing, and then
All right, so what we're going to do is defend each premise. So premise one is every contingent fact has an explanation. This is known as the principle of sufficient reason. So what we're trying to say here is that anything that exists that could have been failed to exist, say like my existence, has some sort of explanation. Like I'm the product of my parents. That's an explanation for my own existence.
all right, Zach. The fallacy of composition is an informal fallacy that arises when one infers that something is true of the whole from the fact that it is true of some part of the whole. So that's what this whole thing is that you're doing now. That's all it is. All of this argument boils down to a ginormous fallacy of composition. And that's ignoring all the non sequiturs, bald assertions, and the outright just brokenness of this as a syllogism in the first place. The formal fallacies here just make this structurally invalid, anyways, but hopefully you will learn something new, perhaps. Maybe you could actually learn logic so that you wouldn't use this bad argument and see how broken it is, and then, I don't know, fix the argument before you present it. That's an idea. I don't know, it might be worth trying.
So 3 reasons to accept it. First, it's intuitively obvious that every contingent fact has an explanation.
No, it's not. There you go, I just broke that idea. It's intuitive. That means something that we just know, right? Well, no, I'm saying I don't know that. So now it's not intuitive anymore. All you need is one counterexample to negate the idea that something is or isn't intuitive. You would know not to make such a universal statement if you had studied informal logic. But I guess you haven't because, well, you did this here. So, no to this, and also, even if it was the case, that's not a good way to get to the truth of something. Intuition can be, and often is, wrong.
In our everyday experience, things have explanations for their existence. There's a natural intuition here. When your car breaks down, it's not like we're gonna say, "Oh, it's for no reason at all." Like surely there's a reason for why your car just broke down. You can point to like something like the motor or transmission, or I don't really know car stuff, so this is a bad analogy. But in our experience, we search for explanations when there's things.
I do not understand, Zach, why you would have a bad analogy when you could have thought up a good analogy to put here instead. It baffles me, truly. Regardless, when was the last time that your car broke down and you thought, man, why did God do this to me? Why did God make my car stop working? When was the last time that you blamed God for your car stopping to function, Zach? Ultimately, you would have to, wouldn't you? If God's the root cause of everything, then God's also the cause of your car breaking down. But it's also the cause of your car working in the first place.
He's the guy that saved my life on that fishing trip when the boat capsized?
Yes.
Did he capsize the boat?
Yeah.
He killed my grandmother and left me those millions of dollars?
You bet ya.
So he's the one who cured my mom's cancer.
Yeah.
So he's kind of a good guy, but he's also kind of a prick, too.
Reason 2 is it's the foundation of modern science. Like we all agree that humans exist for some reason at all. No one says that they just exist for no reason at all. Like imagine if you're in a debate in evolutionary biology and some evolutionary biologist comes around and says, humans have just always existed eternally. There's no reason for it. It's just happened. all the scientists would be like, wait, what's going on here, bro? Like, it's just such a foundational part of science that things have explanations for their existence. We look for explanations as deep as we can. And it seems like to me, like the whole project of science is looking for these explanations because we have a deep seated intuition in something like the principle of sufficient reason, where contingent facts have explanations.
But many times in science, you must accept that there are mysteries. There are mysteries that might remain mysterious for your entire life, Zach. And you must be content with that mystery. Rather than taking what we know and then making an extraordinary leap into the unknown to say, because we know all this is true of all this, then we can jump to this conclusion and say it must be true of all of this. The fallacy of composition error that I was talking about earlier. Instead of doing that, just be content with the fact that when it comes to the origin of the universe, we don't know. And for now, that seems to be the way that it is. Now, if you want to learn all the math and physics, etc., that you would need to know to make a proper model of the universe, and then use that knowledge to include God in that model, to have predictions of how that would work, so that the model could be falsified, and then submit that to a peer-reviewed publication to get other people to study it and make sure that it's true, that would be interesting. That would be scientific. And if you could test that there's a God in some way, shape, or form, well, then you could show that there's a God. And if you could show that there's a God, then you'd have evidence for God. Something you said that you had in episode 1. But you don't. Because throughout episode 2, you've done nothing but say that this argument leads somehow to God. It doesn't and cannot, but you think that it does. That's a problem, Zach.
Reason 3 is there's no known violations of the principle of sufficient reason. Everything that we have encountered has some sort of explanation for its existence, even if it's an indeterministic explanation. Indeterministic explanations are still things that require an explanation. So, yeah.
Oh, look, it's been true every other time. It can't possibly be false ever. I wonder what kind of fallacy that is.
All right, premise 2. There's a contingent fact that contains all other contingent facts. This is known as the big conjunctive contingent fact. So, for example, there's a fact that we're going to call fact A that I'm typing on a computer in a library at this exact moment. Within fact A, we can identify multiple things that are also contingent. The computer, the library, and I are all contingent facts with outside explanations for our existence. I may have chosen to not write this book at this moment or this slideshow, or I may have chosen to write it in my room instead, or I may have chosen to use paper instead of a computer. There are facts within fact A that are contingent parts of a larger contingent fact. So what we're trying to do is say, like, hey, we can have like some general fact, like me typing in a library on a computer, and like look at all the pieces of that fact and see a bunch of other contingent things within that whole contingent thing of me typing in a computer. So similarly, I think we can form a contingent fact that contains all other contingent facts in the world. What we can do is put together everything in existence that is contingent. This contingent fact will contain everything that could have been otherwise. Plants, energy, cats, trees, and planes. Anything that's contingent would be part of the BCCCF. Think about it like a big party full of everything that's contingent. Think of this as like a big party and it's a sum of reality that could have been different. There's nothing outside of the BCCF that could have been different than the way it is, as we're putting together all contingent things. So the collection of all contingent things would then be contingent, as all contingent things cry out for a further explanation. So we put together this big party of everything that's contingent. And remember, contingent things depend on some sort of further explanation for its existence. So we have to ask then, like, hey, we have this big party of contingent things. Like, what explains all the contingent things here? Surely it's got to be something further. And this dives right into premise 3, where this is where it takes us.
Zach, you said that you were going to defend that premise. You explained it. That's not a defense. A defense is something different than an explanation. Zach. Hello, Zach. A defense is something different than an explanation. You know that, right? I mean, you didn't actually defend it from anything, because you didn't, like, put it out there and like no one attacked it, then you would defend it. Like you know what words are, right, Zach? Like that's not how.
So, therefore, there'd be an explanation of this fact. This follows since that if there is a BCCF, which is all the contingent facts put together, it would have to have an explanation, since all contingent facts have an explanation for their existence. So, the sum of everything that's contingent would have to have some sort of further explanation for its existence.
So let me summarize this whole video so that we can end it and not have to go further into his explanation here, because the whole argument is this: all things have causes unless it doesn't. There's a thing called God that caused everything else that doesn't have a cause. Breaking the rule. See, there's a rule that we established. The rule was everything has to have a cause. And then we say, well, there has to be a thing that doesn't have a cause. So we're going to name that thing God, and then we're going to say, well, it caused everything else, and it was never itself caused. It's the only thing that breaks the rule. This, of course, is special pleading. You have built in to this argument as its conclusion a special pleading, an exception to the rule. That is what God is. God is, when framed in this manner, a logical fallacy of special pleading. God is an informal fallacy. Well done. You've just made it that we all should be skeptical of God. I could continue to cover this video, and I could continue to say non sequitur, fallacy of composition, and special pleading. I could do that, but I fear that it would, well, just be repetitive and kind of boring. I've pointed out already the number of insane amounts of fallacies that this, quote, not enough quotes in the universe, argument, end quote, has to it. Nothing here is evidence. Nothing here is valid or sound. The structure is broken. The logic is broken. Everything about this is broken. I don't know what you're defending it from. You're just simply explaining it half the time. And half of that time, you don't even seem to be a good job explaining it, but that's really not your fault, because it seems like you got this whole idea from somebody else who themselves probably didn't know what the bleep they were doing. Apologetics is an effort to make it seem that your faith is an intellectual pursuit rather than one that is based wholly and solely on faith. It's based solely and wholly on faith. It's not an intellectual pursuit. You can pretend all you want, but the skeptics, we know. Anyways, Zach, I'm done with video 2. I know somebody out there is going to be like, you converted, man, you didn't cover the whole video. Yeah, look, there's enough. What am I going to say? Oh, I'm going to complain about the past being infinite? Ah, jeez. No, I'm not. No, there's nothing. What more is there to say? This same old, same old. He doesn't know any of this is true. He can't know any of this is true. There's no way for him to know anything about any of this. It's just pure conjecture, bald assertions, all the way down. Nothing new under the sun, and no evidence. As such, I'm done. He's already made his God into a logical fallacy. That's more than enough reason to conclude here. But I'll tell you what. You really, really, really want me to cover the rest of this video? Fine. Put your money where your mouth is and send me $100 and I'll do the rest of the video. Until then, I'm done with this. There's no valid and sound argument here. There certainly isn't any repeatable test, and there's no empirical evidence whatsoever, despite being told in video 1 that we had evidence of God. Of course, we didn't get it. What did we get? A reformatted Kalam cosmological argument. Whoopee-doo. I'm done. Thanks for watching. Prove wrong.